Did you know a medieval monk tried to fly and ended up breaking both his legs? Yeah, before the Wright brothers were out here making airplanes a thing, a dude named Aylmer of Malmesbury saw birds flying and thought, how hard could it be? So, naturally, he tied some wings to himself, climbed a tower, and launched off. And guess what? It actually worked, for about 200 meters. Then gravity remembered it had a job to do. Boom. Leg day, but not in the gym way. His only regret? I should have added a tail. But then he realized something pilots today don't have to worry about. Landing. Yeah, no wheels, no parachute, just vibes. Dude hit the ground like a medieval Looney Tunes character. Legs shattered, ego bruised. Bro basically invented the first ever patch notes for human flight. One medieval writer who was fascinated by Aylmer's attempt to fly wrote, "This dude really thought he could fly, got bodied by physics, and now he regrets not having a tail." And Aylmer wasn't the only one out here speedrunning natural selection. Over in Muslim Spain, Abbas ibn Firnas tried something similar in the 9th century. He built a glider, took off, and like Aylmer, forgot that gravity was not negotiable. That same era also had people staring at the sky, figuring out astronomy with just their eyeballs. No telescopes, no fancy space agencies, just a lot of squinting and good guesses while trying to understand gravity. Speaking of gravity, you wouldn't believe what passed for the materials used in creating a glider for flight. For one, they made use of feathers. You ever look at a pigeon and think, I could totally do that? Well, medieval inventors did too, except instead of watching bird documentaries, they just started strapping actual feathers to themselves. Take Aylmer of Malmesbury, for instance, a monk from 11th century England who was so obsessed with the idea of flying that he built a pair of wings out of bird feathers and jumped off a tower. While he glided briefly, the outcome was disastrous. But instead of questioning his life choices, Aylmer decided the problem wasn't the concept of humans shouldn't fly. It was that he forgot to add a tail. Also, there was another material that medieval innovators practically attempted to use in making flight possible. Yes, that was wood. Some medieval geniuses figured if wood works for boats, it must work for planes too. Terrible logic, but hilarious results. They built rigid wooden wings and covered them in fabric, hoping they could generate enough lift. Unfortunately, they did not. Instead of soaring through the skies, these unlucky test pilots plummeted like medieval anvils. Imagine hyping up your big launch, getting the whole village to watch, and then immediately face-planting so hard you become the town legend, but not in a good way. The truly fascinating thing about these woods was how the medieval engineers got them. So, first things first, they needed wood, but not just any wood. This wasn't Minecraft where you punch a tree and call it a day. They had to pick something light yet strong, like ash or willow. These were the medieval versions of aerospace-grade materials, except, made for wagons and longbows. Also, imagine explaining to a carpenter in the 11th century that you need wood not for a door or a cart, but to yeet yourself off a tower. That conversation alone must have been comedy gold. Once they had the right wood, it had to be shaped into something wing-like. This was pre-science era aerodynamics, so they probably just copied bird wings and hoped for the best. The plan was simple. Wings go flap flap, so if I wear wings, I go flap flap. Solid logic, October 10th. But shaping the wood was no easy task. They used handsaws, axes, chisels, and whatever passed for medieval sandpaper, probably just a really angry rock. This was hardcore DIY. No power tools, no engineering degree, just pure medieval optimism. Now, wood alone was too heavy, so they had to attach some kind of fabric or feathers to actually catch air. And you wouldn't believe their options. These medieval innovators used linen or wool, because nothing says aviation breakthrough like wearable furniture fabric. Then there was leather, which was heavy. But hey, maybe they thought, if it works for boots, it works for wings. But even more interesting was those who used actual bird feathers, plucked straight from geese or swans. Because if birds can fly, surely their feathers will help a human do the same. Can we take a moment to appreciate the sheer patience required to glue hundreds of feathers onto wooden wings using medieval adhesives, aka tree sap and crushed animal bones? This was the original arts and crafts nightmare. Now came the fun part. Attaching these bad boys to your back. They probably used leather straps, rope, or just sheer willpower. Imagine some medieval guy tying himself into his DIY flight suit like, alright, I'm about to change history. Bro, you look like a poorly dressed chicken. Haters will say it's fake. This is also the step where they realized, wait, how do I control this thing? And the answer was, they didn't. No flaps, no rudders, just pure medieval chaos. Finally, the moment of truth. Find the tallest structure around, a castle, a church tower, or maybe just a really big hill if you're feeling cautious. Then, jump. For about half a second, they probably felt unstoppable. They were soaring, they were flying, they were immediately plummeting. The challenge came when the sun was shining in its strength, gluing coat feathers and fabric in wax to hold everything together. The reality was one sunny day away from disaster. One unlucky soul geared up, took a deep breath, launched off a cliff, only for the wax to melt and his entire plane to disassemble midair. Congratulations, you just invented the world's first in-flight malfunction. So basically, medieval innovators had the challenge of limited engineering knowledge. These folks had the concept but didn't have the math to back it up. Another challenge was with the church. They probably wasn't feeling it. Imagine explaining to the bishop why you're trying to fly. It's for science, I swear. I'm not a wizard. Meanwhile, while these guys were out here doing medieval jackass, some thinkers were staring at the stars, trying to figure out what was going on up there. If you think flat earthers today are wild, medieval Europe had a different problem. They thought Earth was the VIP of the universe. But let's clear up a big myth. Medieval people did not think the Earth was flat. That's a fake news level misconception. Scholars knew Earth was round. They just thought the sun, moon, and all the stars revolved around it. Now, a few key moments in history defined the beginning of astronomy in ancient Europe. The 8th to 9th century marked the first time Charlemagne decided that, actually, science is kinda dope, and ancient astronomy books started making a comeback. In fact, by the 12th century, Islamic science influence had become the norm. European scholars got their hands on Arabic translations of Greek texts. Turns out, Muslim astronomers had been cooking for centuries. And then there was medieval universities. Places like Oxford and Paris were teaching astronomy, but their textbooks still said planets moved in weird loops, epicycles, because Ptolemy wrote it 1,000 years earlier, and nobody questioned it. However, the downside to the emergence of astronomy in medieval Europe was the fact that Greek texts were treated like Twitter threads. Imagine if science worked like, Newton said it once, so no need to double-check. Also, the absence of telescope made it hard to make discoveries, especially when your best tool is aggressive squinting. But even with all these issues, something was about to change, and by the 15th and 16th centuries, things started shifting. First off, Leonardo da Vinci was out here sketching flying machines in the 1400s like a Renaissance Tony Stark, way before anyone had even figured out that gravity was kind of a big deal. The dude was basically the first person to say, what if we didn't just accept that humans can't fly, and then actually tried to do something about it? But what inspired him? Well, it wasn't TikTok rabbit holes or sci-fi movies. Nope. Leonardo was obsessed with birds. He spent hours watching them flap around, taking notes, and probably thinking, why do they get to have all the fun? Da Vinci didn't just casually glance at birds like some guy at a park. He studied them like a detective. He'd sit there, watching how they spread their wings, how they adjusted their angles, how they used the wind. It was less, "Aw, cute bird," and more, "All right, what's the aerodynamics on this pigeon?" His notes, collected in his famous codex on the flight of birds, break down stuff like air pressure, wing curvature, and even turbulence. You know, the thing that makes plane rides feel like a horror movie. He figured out that birds don't just flap randomly, they manipulate the air around them. So, after taking notes on every bird in Italy, Da Vinci decided to sketch his own flying machine, which he called the ornithopter. Big fancy name, but it was basically a giant pair of mechanical wings strapped to a person. It looked cool, but there was a small problem. Humans are not birds. Leonardo thought if a person flapped hard enough, they could generate enough lift to take off, which, scientifically speaking, is a great way to pull a muscle and go absolutely nowhere. Humans don't have the muscle power or wing structure to just flap into the sky. So in modern terms, L machine, but A plus for effort. Leonardo also sketched something called the aerial screw, which sounds like the name of a bad action movie but was actually one of the first concepts for a helicopter. It was a giant spiral-shaped contraption that was supposed to spin and lift off. Did it work? It was basically a giant medieval fidget spinner that required way too many people to turn the crank, but the idea behind it was solid. He was thinking about how air could be pushed down to create lift, something that wouldn't actually be used until the 20th century when helicopters became a real thing. You'd think with all these genius ideas, Da Vinci would have been the first person to take flight, but nope, none of his designs were ever built. Why? Well, because of tech limitations, the opposition of the church, and of course he was too busy. The guy was painting Mona Lisa, dissecting corpses, designing robots, and sketching futuristic weapons. He was basically the original procrastinating genius. So many ideas, not enough time. Then, there was another key moment in history, when Copernicus had the audacity to suggest that Earth actually orbits the Sun, which the Church responded to with immediate side-eye. However, medieval Europeans got close to astronomy after telescopes were invented by 1608. Suddenly, Galileo was spotting moons around Jupiter, and the Vatican was like, "No, we don't like that." Here's a fun fact about the invention of the telescope that'll help you to appreciate your modern telescope. So long before telescopes, people already knew that curved pieces of glass, aka lenses, could bend light and make things look bigger or smaller. Monks and scholars had been using magnifying glasses for reading, and by the 1200s, someone had figured out that putting two lenses together could help people with bad eyesight. These were medieval glasses. Now, fast forward to the late 1500s. Dutch glassmakers were playing around with different lenses, and one of them probably went, "Wait a minute, if I stack these lenses just right, I can make that bird on the other side of the river look like it's right in front of me." And just like that, the first baby steps toward the telescope were taken, all by accident. But that's not all. In 1608, a guy named Hans Lippershey, a Dutch spectacle maker, took this whole lens stacking idea and said, "You know who would love this? The military." And honestly, he wasn't wrong. Imagine you're a 1600s general, and instead of waiting for an enemy army to show up 3 feet away from your face, you can see them from miles away. That's a game changer. Lippershey's design had about 3 times magnification. That's like trying to get a closer look at something across the street. You're seeing a bit more detail, but not like you'd expect from today's high-powered telescopes. So Lippershey applied for a patent to claim the telescope as his invention. But, plot twist, 2 other guys in the Netherlands came forward at the same time, claiming they also invented it. It was basically the 1608 version of 3 people showing up to a party in the same outfit. Now here's where things go from nice invention to changing history forever. It was when Galileo Galilei, the Italian scientist who had main character energy before that was even a thing, came into the picture. He heard about this Dutch spyglass, got his hands on the concept, and was like, "This is cool, but what if I made it better?" So in 1609 he built his own version, stronger, sharper, and ready to blow minds. And instead of just using it for military stuff, he did something nobody else thought of. He pointed it at the sky. And what did he see? Oh, just moons orbiting Jupiter, mountains on the moon, and way more stars than anyone had ever counted before. Basically, Galileo took the telescope and turned it into the universe's first deep dive. Interestingly, Galileo's telescope had magnification ranging from 8x to 20x, which is a huge improvement for looking at things like the moon and planets. Galileo even managed to sketch the surface of the moon and see the moons of Jupiter with this kind of magnification. His telescope could also observe the phases of Venus, supporting the heliocentric theory that the planets orbit the sun. To put this in perspective, today's telescopes can have magnifications of up to hundreds or even thousands of times, meaning we can look at planets in other galaxies and even zoom in on objects like black holes. But, back in the day, these early telescopes were like squinting really hard with a pair of magnifying glasses strapped together. Imagine trying to use your phone camera to look at Jupiter with just a tiny zoom function. Now, that's what medieval astronomers were working with. Despite all the drama, the telescope revolutionized science. Medieval Europe didn't exactly have NASA, but it kept scientific ideas alive, experimented, even if people got hurt in the process, and laid the foundation for modern space science. Without these early thinkers, we wouldn't have astronauts eating space burritos in zero gravity today. So next time you see a plane or look up at the stars, just remember, a medieval monk once tried to do that, and absolutely wrecked himself. Now over to y'all. What would you do differently to invent a technology for human flight if you lived in medieval Europe? Let's hear from you in the comment section below, and don't forget to follow and subscribe to this channel.